Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you, even though it's virtual. For those who don't know me, my name is Kent Nelson. I'm the Forest Ranger Specialist with the Maine Forest Service, and I'm the state liaison for the Firewise program. And this morning, I'd like to kind of go over some of the requirements for Firewise and a little bit of the history of Firewise on Bustins Island, and talk about brush chipping, what we've done in the past. And then I'll kind of talk about Maine's 2020 fire season and some wildfire concerns on Bustins Island, and a quick review of some home ignition zones, which is tied into the Firewise program, and then talk about Firewise plans for the future. I just realized I forgot to shut my door, so the rest of my office is listening to me, so hang on a second. Not that there's a whole lot of people in the office nowadays, but this could be a little loud down the hallway. So hopefully you can see the screen with the map on it. I'm going to kind of get rid of the 4 or 5 of you I can see. And I guess this is pretty casual, but we will have time at the end for questions. But if something with one of the pictures sparks your interest, just go ahead and shout it out. So this is just an overview of where Bustins is located, in case there's people who are not familiar. But I'd like to start off with a short overview of the Firewise program. Some of the requirements are you need to maintain a Firewise board, and you also have to have hazardous fuels mitigation, which is a fancy word for brush chipping days. And you have to also have a Firewise Day event, which includes wildfire prevention and education. And how this works is NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, they don't give out a Firewise program just willy-nilly. You have to be committed to having both a brush chipping day and a Firewise Day event every year. And how they do that is they ask how many do you have in your community. So if you had 100 dwellings, you would be required for each person to do 1 hour of volunteer work associated with the brush chipping day or the Firewise Day. So they never charge any money, but they do expect you to complete 100 volunteer hours if you have 100 dwellings. Now, I think Bustins has, what? How many dwellings do you guys have? Well, let's just go with 100 now. So if you had 100 cottages, then you would be required 100 volunteer hours. But that doesn't, we realize not everyone participates in the program because it's voluntary. So if 10 people do 10 hours each, then that completes the 100 volunteer hours. So a brush chipping day and a Firewise Day event usually is more than sufficient to meet this volunteer hour requirements. You guys have exceeded it every year, so I'm not too worried about it. So I think Ken will be doing the renewal, the annual Firewise renewal, and he'll be putting in some numbers, and basically it's $25 per hour is the volunteer rate, and then it kind of calculates it all up so you can see whether you've met the requirement or not. But I don't think you'll have any trouble making it. So I'm going to move on to the history of the Firewise program on Bustins Island. And believe it or not, I don't know if you guys were involved in this, but back in 2005, we did a bunch of wildfire risk assessments on Bustins Island. I was not involved in that, but the reason we did those was we completed a community wildfire protection plan, which is kind of a national program where we go into communities and assess the risk of fire and make recommendations. So I looked at some of the data from that, and they did 44 wildfire risk assessments and 11 vegetation plots. So the overall rating was considered high risk for a wildfire. And I did do about 8 or 9 of these same wildfire risk assessments in July on Bustins, and I'm going to talk about that a little later. it was kind of interesting to compare the results from 2005 to the results 15 years later. But moving on with the history of Bustins Island and the Firewise program. In 2014, we were contacted by the overseers of the board when they was concerned about wildfires, and we did some more wildfire risk assessments then. That's one of our summer interns there, putting some data in. And then at the Firewise and Safety Day training in 2015, Bustins Island became one of Maine's 8 nationally recognized Firewise days, Firewise communities. So remember that. We had a good turnout that year, as we always do. And I think I'm handing a clear plexiglass plaque to Faith that says, "Welcome to the Firewise program," something like that. You can't quite see it there. But we've also had one of the most broad in terms of age group at these meetings. Usually we get 5 or 10 people at these meetings, and they're all adult homeowners, but we have kids and teenagers, and so we incorporated Smokey Bear in a couple of these, and I think that's great. That's the only Firewise community that has had interest in that, and by far you have the most turnout for any other community, so I'm very proud of that. So I'm going to move ahead to an overview of the brush chipping program, and this also started in 2014. And at that time, we relied on volunteers. We didn't have our summer intern program. And this is Crawford's kind of this contraption of tractor, trailer, chipper that he towed around that I was talking about earlier. And it worked really well, but we have since kind of evolved to using something a little more efficient and a little bit easier to get around the corners. So that first chipping day in 2014, we chipped about 3 truckloads of brush, and I mean that's over 9 tons. That's a lot of brush. We really got a lot done. And since then, we've kind of tapered off on the amount, at least the day that we're there. I know some other chipping goes on, which is great. But in 2016, we were able to hire some summer interns to load the brush, and that kind of helped to reduce some of the volunteers, although they still want to help, and that's been great. I've been very proud to work with you guys, and everyone's been very safe, so we'll hope to keep it that way. You can see some volunteers loading some brush here. I think that was the second rendition where we used the fire truck to tow a trailer. So then we started bringing our own chipper truck over on the barge, and that seems to be working pretty good for now. Seems to get around the corners all right. And we also have a smaller chipper that's gas powered that seems to do pretty well. For this year, despite the COVID quarantine, and we actually had one of our summer interns that was mobilized on a fire, we still did just about as much. We did 2.5 truckloads, so that's pretty close to what we do normally. And the homeowner hours that we record on the chipping forms was at 162. That's a lot of time spent on cutting brush, and we really appreciate that, and it really is making a difference. Any comments before I press on?
I think you're doing good.
Okay, everyone's still there.
Actually, Kent, how do I do this? How do I get on?
Talk.
Hey, Kent, I do have a question. So the hours that people cut their brush and that kind of stuff are not considered volunteer hours?
Oh, they more than certainly are. Yeah.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And even what we're doing now counts, and the prep time to do this presentation. I mean, any prep time you guys did before the chipping day, that all counts. So it's a pretty easy requirement to make, but I hate to say it this way, but it keeps out the riffraff. I mean, you guys earn this Firewise USA status, and we just don't give it out like candy. So thanks for clarifying that. So let's talk a little bit about this fire year in Maine. I said earlier today that our average amount of fires per year is around 500 fires, and which burns around 500 acres. But this year we've doubled that average. We're currently at 1,108 fires, which have burned 1,019 acres, and that's quite a bump up compared to the last 10 years. And we haven't crunched the numbers on this year yet, but generally we found that nearly 75% of these fires either destroy, damage, or threaten structures. So we have a lot of fires near homes in Maine, and that's one reason why we have this program. So the top three causes of wildfires in Maine so far in 2020, escape debris burns. That's the people who have good intentions. They're burning their brush to try to probably prevent it from being a fire or an eyesore later. And even though they have those good intentions, they often do it at a time of day that is dangerous, like the middle of the afternoon when it's hot and dry and windy and the relative humidity is low, and they escape, or they leave them unattended, go away, don't come back for a couple of days. So those numbers are at 286 out of that 1,000 or so. And then the second highest cause of fires is the one in the bottom left corner. That's equipment caused. And we've got a harvesting machine there that overheated and caught fire, but probably don't see too many of those on Bustins Island. But equipment fires also includes people who accidentally start fires with lawnmowers, brush cutters, even chainsaws. When they're working and the conditions are right, I've seen a chainsaw just set down in grass during the springtime, like dead grass, before it's greened up, and the heat from the exhaust has caused a fire. So we need to be careful with all kinds of equipment when we're working outside during these dry periods. And the third highest cause is no surprise, it's campfires. And if you look at that picture in the right-hand corner, that was labeled as unattended campfire, but they actually have stones that they piled around to keep the fire enclosed, but they left it going. And when the forest ranger found this fire, it's quite obvious that it escaped into the leaves and needles outside of those rocks and then went on to burn a couple acres behind there. So let's make sure if we have any campfires that they're totally out before you leave the area. And one other comment, people often ask, like, well, how many of these fires in Maine are caused by humans? And it's really in the high 90%, because so far this year only 47 fires have not been caused by humans, and that it means that they were caused by lightning. So less than 4% of the fires so far this year were not caused by humans. So if it's caused by humans, then in theory it's preventable, and that's what we try to install in people to try to prevent wildfires. I've done this presentation for the other 7 Firewise communities, and each time I did those presentations, we were in a different state of drought. So I left that slide in there just as a reminder of how dry it became this summer and into the fall. I think it's almost back to normal, but not really. And this is just a strange weather pattern we're in. I'm enjoying the warm weather, but I'm afraid that it's going to get cold here pretty soon. So just a reminder. I guess I'll stop for a second and ask the folks attending. Did you notice that it was especially dry on Bustins Island this summer?
Oh yeah, definitely.
You could tell walking around it was crunchy dry. And did any of the wells dry up or anything? Or
No, a lot of people have asked that, but to my knowledge, there wasn't any wells that went dry. Maybe because we didn't have we had plenty of people there, but maybe not the high usage that normally would be on a regular year. This year was a little bit funny, but that's my take on it.
yeah,
I think we're lucky.
Yep.
I had to fill Rob Boone's rain barrel once, but other than that, he doesn't mind that pond water in his rain barrel.
Yeah, that's very unusual. That most summers I never have to get it filled. That's maybe the third time in the 30 years I've owned the place.
Wow. I know my lawn, I live just west of Augusta. My lawn died twice this summer. It died in June and it also died in August. So, and I don't have a strong enough well to water it, so I just kind of let it go. Anyway, we'll keep moving on here. Some of these, here are some wildfire concerns in general on coastal islands. You've got volatile vegetation near structures, and that usually means softwood. The softwood, it has a lot more resins in the bark and is more susceptible to wildfire than hardwood. You've got excessive fuel loading near the structures and commonly owned property. Again, that's the fancy words for a lot of brush near your buildings. And then we all know you can cut them 1 year, within 4 or 5 years, it grows right back. So it's kind of a never-ending battle, but you guys have done very well with that. And obviously, there's increased response time and access due to the remote location, lack of roads. And we were just talking about this, there's limited freshwater supply for fire suppression. Salt water is not really good for the fire equipment and subject to tides. So probably nothing really new there, but I'd just like to go over those.
Well,
Go ahead.
I know Jim Boyko's so shy, he probably won't say anything, but he came up with a way that we can help to prime the pump at Leland's Dock. That's been a constant problem for quite a few years, and Jim kind of came up with he's got a little vacuum pump there to suck the air out of that 4-inch line, and we actually tried it. It still takes about 8 minutes to get get the water up to the pump at low tide, but it's a little more reassuring than standing there holding your hand on the Venturi setup, because you don't know whether you're getting it or not. So anyway, just thought I'd throw that in, and that makes that pump a lot more accessible, and a little more confidence in the thing is going to work. The pump works great, but we also tested it at the fire pond to make sure that it would lift the water. We put the pump on a pallet and raised it up as high as I could with the tractor, and it was pulling the water out of the pond just fine. So anyway, just
the problem we were having was priming it, and we had a Venturi on there for a while, then a hand pump, and when we tested it at the pond, we found that those priming pumps really were not very helpful. I mean, they would lift maybe 4 or 5 feet. Is that your experience too, Ken?
I haven't done that much with pumping out of the ocean, but I think that's really good that you guys have re-engineered that in such a way that it builds confidence and that you feel better about it, because we all know that the Freeport Fire Department's going to get there as soon as they can, but it's really going to be you guys doing the initial stuff there and get things set up. So
in this issue of priming, it's not a problem with the portable pump, because we just drag it right down to the water. The pump that Crawford's talking about was a larger pump that's kind of stationary on a dock.
Yeah.
So with a full the day where we actually tested it there, we had a really low tide, and I think we figured we lifted, we were pumping at from 14 feet, which is
wow,
substantial.
Yeah. Well, great job. All right, we'll keep pressing on. Thanks for the comments. NFPA has kind of a new way to talk about defensible space. I know we have that on the side of our chipping truck, but they like to have people thinking about home ignition zones. And there's basically 3 zones that you should be concerned with. And the first one is the immediate zone, which is 0 to 5 feet. And then the intermediate zone, 5 to 30 feet. and then the extended zone 30 to 100 feet. And what they want you to do is you're going to kind of focus on the intermediate, the one closest to your structures. You're going to focus on that a little bit more than the intermediate, and then not as much on the extended. So it's just kind of how much you need to do to reduce the risk of a wildfire coming in from your house or from the forest to your structures. Here's an example of vegetation within the immediate zone, and these are just kind of random pictures. I don't think these were taken on Bustins, but on the right-hand side, you see the softwood vegetation right next to the cedar shake shingles, and if there was a fire coming from the woods, it would easily ignite that. On the left-hand side, you've got a pretty good situation. You've got well-watered grass there, and it's trimmed low, and then you've got stones, non-combustible materials there. So if there was any kind of a surface fire coming through there, or even embers, it's not likely to ignite that structure. Also, especially this time of year, you've got wood and leaf litter near structures. And on the left-hand side, there's a picture of a cottage kind of uphill, and you can see a lot of leaves and stuff below that if there was a fire or some type of ignition source below here, it would carry up and kind of get underneath that porch and ignite the structure. On the right-hand side, you've got some chairs and a table sitting there on rocks. And granted, there's a few leaves blowing around there, but that's not enough to ignite anything. And you can see the foundation is exposed, and they do have the cedar shake shingles, but there's no real vegetation near them. So that's kind of a better example there. There's this research company down in North Carolina that set up a experiment, and they kind of built this frame house, and the left-hand side has cedar shake shingles and had some mulch in front of the yard and had some type of combustible doormat. And then the one on the right-hand side is more your typical, I think it's vinyl siding with rocks instead of mulch. And they created this ember machine. And I was kind of fascinated by this because somehow they ground up little wood chips and got them on fire and blew them at this thing and waited to see what would happen. So you can see that given similar circumstances, the side on the left with the mulch on the ground and the cedar shake shingles is pretty much toast, on fire, and then they eventually put it out, and you could see the difference in how those materials affected how that fire behaved. And we hope that this never happens on Bustins Island, but it's just a reminder that embers can really carry a fire. And I'll talk about that a little bit later towards the end. But it could be a structure fire on one side of the island, and the embers and the heat from that fire could throw that firebrand way up into the atmosphere and then drop it down on the other side. And if nobody's home and there's all kinds of what we call fine fuels near that structure, then it could easily ignite. So here's a picture of a fairly new log cabin home that nearly burned because of some wood debris and vegetation near the structure. You can see there was a ladder there. I guess they were still working on the roof or something when this fire came up, but fortunately they were able to save that. And we do have these kind of fires in Maine. The photo on the left is from a fire down east where we've had as much as a couple thousand acres burn 10 or 15 years ago. So that shows some of the smoke cloud coming up. And on the right, we staged this in Camden a couple years ago. This house was slated to be burned, and the fire department had control of it. And I asked them if we could ignite some hay bales near the house and see if it would light the brush, the evergreen brush right there. And it certainly did, and it went up and ignited that porch in no time. Now, this was taken in the spring, probably second week of May, when the grasses hadn't really greened up yet. But we put that fire out, and they ended up burning the rest of the structure later that fall. But we do have those conditions in Maine. Again, the home ignition zones, we're going to talk a little bit about the intermediate zone, 5 feet to 30 feet here. And this is a picture I took down in Booth Bay, and that home faces the ocean, and there's actually another home below that's right on the water. So if that home below them caught fire, or they were careless with a campfire and it escaped, it would burn upslope in that softwood, and they had dropped some brush there in the center, probably to enhance their view, and that would easily get up into that porch and burn that house. So just a reminder, you don't have a lot of topography on Bustins Island, but fire does tend to burn faster as it goes uphill because it preheats as it goes. So if you have a cottage that's not on the water, but it's within the island and it's a little bit higher from the others, then you might want to do a little bit more clearing near your structures, more than the other folks.
Oh, a quick question on the the shoreland zoning and all that kind of stuff. How do we, I mean, some of that stuff you can't cut and get away with anymore.
That's true, and I'm glad you brought that up, because our recommendations do not overrule the shoreland zoning laws. So if you have a specific problem, we could maybe take a look at it. And I have worked with DEP, who enforces those shoreland zones, and they give a little bit of leeway on the fine fuels within the immediate zone, within that 0 to 5 feet. Like if you take away some of the leaves and needles and you replace them with small rocks, they're okay with that. But you can't cut down large trees near the water. You can prune them. You can prune trees to keep them from becoming ladder fuels, which is my next slide. I'm going to ignore my phone message there. Okay. So we've talked about ladder fuels before, and that's where a surface fire, which are the most common types of fires in Maine, gets up into the crowns of softwood trees in particular. And if you have a softwood tree along the shore and you see some kind of a threat from fire there, you could prune it, but you never want to take more than 2/3 of the branches of a tree. You always want to leave at least 1/3. But realistically, though, you're not likely to have fires coming from the ocean. Now, I've said that many times, and one time someone raised their hand and said, well, we had a boat catch on fire, and it was drifting, and it landed near our dock, and it caught our dock on fire. I'm like, okay. Yes, it could happen, but it's very unlikely. So if you had someone really concerned about fire coming from the ocean, then I would certainly be willing to look at it, but I don't think I'm going to be, well, I don't have the authority to say, yeah, cut these all down. This, you don't want to fire. So the bottom line is, if we had a real concern with this, we could maybe talk to the code enforcement officer and try to get some wiggle room on the fine stuff near the structures, but we're not going to get permission to cut down big trees near the water.
Understood. No, I think we have had some that have, they're either hazard trees hanging over a cottage or something like that, and the CEO has been very good about granting permission to take those as long as they replant and do all that kind of stuff to keep everything moving.
Yes, and again, thank you for bringing this up, because a hazard tree that could fall and do damage to your roof is not necessarily a fire hazard. Like if it's a maple tree that's going to fall on your house, it's not likely to burn. It's going to cause damage. So they're apples and oranges. So yeah, the bottom line is don't cut anything without checking with your code enforcement officer. And if it's a fire hazard, then we'll take a look. But most of those hazards that I hear about are worried about falling, and definitely be conscious of that. We don't want anyone getting hurt. So again, in that immediate zone, the trails and leaf litter, they can wreak havoc even this time of year. If you have that leaf litter right next to your cedar shake shingles or your lattice work, and there's some kind of ignition, that could cause a fire. So what I recommend is try to rake those leaves away. And I was doing that myself. I wanted to practice what I preach, and on Sunday afternoon, I crawled underneath our back deck and raked all the leaves out. There's kind of two methods for preventing surface fires from getting underneath decks. You can either rake it out a couple times a year, or you just close it in with screen or something so nothing can get in. But I prefer this method. It's not that bad, and didn't take too long. Also, leaf litter can build up on roofs, and you see on the left hand, well, both pictures actually, you've got this leaf buildup where the two different roof angles meet. And the one on the right in particular was on a metal roof, which is not going to burn, but if an ember landed in those needles there, it actually could drip down on that pine tree and ignite that pine tree, and then ignite the surface below there and ignite the deck. So even if you have a metal roof, you still need to be kind of aware of the buildup of those fine fuels, and try to rake those off or blow those off before you close up your cottage for the winter. Some other possible ignition sources that we've seen. In this case, on the left, someone had a fancy charcoal grill and they dumped the ashes right there. Now, that could have been done on a rainy day and relatively safe, but it just makes me nervous when people are dumping ashes there. It's not that expensive to buy a metal canister like you see on the right-hand side. You can dump them in there, let them cool for a couple days, and then dispose of them. But I realize you guys have challenges out there in Bustins. You're probably not going to bring ashes back to the mainland, so just make sure they're completely cool if you dispose of any ashes.
One thing that makes me a little nervous sometimes is people with a barbecue grill on the porch backed up to the house. And I have asked a few people over the years to, think about what they're doing, because we've all seen one of those gas grills kind of get going, and that, cedar shakes or dry clapboards or something like that, it doesn't take much to get those going. So.
Well, another good point, Crawford. And, what happens, I think, at least with my propane gas grills, is after a number of years, they start rusting out.
Yep.
They're left outside and they may have moisture in them. And you may not have used it for a few months, and you go to ignite that thing and you run back to the kitchen to get your meat to put on the grill. And the next thing you know, the bottom is falling out and you've got flames. So those things really need to be handled with care, and kind of inspected every year. It's not worth having the bottom drop out of these things because of rust. They're not that expensive. Discard it and get another one. But good points. Other ignition sources we've talked about. The most likely ignition source, I think, on Bustins, because you don't really allow campfires, is other structures. And this was a old fire tower camp that we burned once we had snow on the ground. So just put that in there as an example that structure fires can spread to the forest and then threaten other structures. And just some advice, you've heard me say this before, it's better to concentrate on removing vegetation smaller than the size of your wrist. Because the smaller fuels, as we call them, they don't retain moisture and they're more likely to carry a surface fire. If you've got a big log that's 15 or 16 inches in diameter, it's going to kind of retain that moisture for much longer, and it's not as likely to burn. You think about, when you're camping somewhere and you start a campfire, you don't start with a big log. You start with the fine fuels. You start with the stuff size of a pencil or so. So just some advice on that. I know some of the blowdowns are unsightly and could interfere with your road access, and they need to be cut up. But some of those things is they're not as much of a fire hazard as people think. Oh, here's my disclaimer about shoreland zoning. We talked about that. So I did some wildfire risk assessments when I was out there for half a day on July 14th. And this air photo shows most of them. For some reason, they didn't all get dots. And I didn't want to go into, where I checked, although Ken was with me when we did his house. But I tried to do them randomly, walked around and tried to get different parts of the island. And so I did 9 wildfire risk assessments, and the average score was slightly over 50. So it was about 51, and that puts it into the high risk category. It just barely. Moderate goes from like 25 to 49. And then high goes from 50 to 75, something like that. So we still have a lot of risk out there. And this program that we use to do the wildfire risk assessments it was not designed for islands at all. It was designed for the mainland, and it's one size fits all. We've been using it for 15 or 16 years, so we don't want to change it. But, I kind of maxed out on some of the access. I gave you the highest score because I know the response time could be 20, 30, 40 minutes from the mainland. So it's not surprising that you still have structures that are in the high risk category, but you guys have done a lot. The average score from my 9 risk assessments was 51. And then back in 2005, the average score was a little bit lower. It was 45.8, but they had a larger sample size. So you could get kind of funny with all the statistics. But I think in general, you guys are doing great. Getting the proof is in the pudding. You're filling that chipper truck up 2 or 3 times each summer and doing more on your own. You're trying to keep that brush at bay, and I commend you for that.
I have one thing on the response time. I've had a couple people ask me, their insurance companies are looking to find out what we have for firefighting equipment and how far it is from their residence. And, Jim has got some idea what those pumps will pump at, but, we don't really have much for the insurance company's purposes, I don't think.
Yeah, they want to know where the nearest hydrant is and stuff like that, and you're like, we don't have those. But I certainly, it's not really a laughing matter. I don't want anyone to lose their insurance, because I know some other islands where that's what ends up happening is they have a form on a computer that you have to fill something out, and if it doesn't have any hydrants, then they don't know what to do. I mean, it's coastal islands in Maine. It's a horse of a different color, and I don't know if I could help you with that with any hard data. Maybe we could talk to the Freeport Fire Department about what they could come up with some of their equipment, but I would hope that being successful in this Firewise program would hold some merit, and I certainly would be willing to talk to any insurance people about how much brush you guys remove and how educated you are. I mean, some of this stuff I've been saying there for 5, 6, 7 years, and it's got to be sinking in. So that's why you say, yes, we know all this stuff.
Yeah.
I've got an inspection next year.
So some insurance person will come out and look at your structure?
Yep. They look at the structure. They look at, and you're right, they've got questions which can't be answered.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're definitely, concerned.
Yeah.
Say, Kent, the other part of that is, we don't want to present ourselves as professionals here, as far as evaluating fire prevention and equipment, to the insurance companies. And I mean, we're volunteers, what, I mean, is that you must run up against that a lot, right? I mean,
Yeah, they really want to, they probably will only talk about things that the fire department can do. But you guys can set things up in advance and have it ready for when they arrive. Isn't that part of the plan?
yeah. But we,
Yeah.
We don't want to present ourselves to the insurance companies as professional firefighters,
No,
and because that doesn't do anyone any good. So,
but you can't say, yeah, we're doing nothing. We're just putting all our eggs in the basket of the Freeport Fire Department, and that's not a slight against them. They're going to do a great job when they get there, but you never know if they're tied up with something else on the other side of town. That response time is of great concern. So, but I think you guys are taking the right steps. There's only so much you can do. It's not going to be cost effective to pay for a firefighter to sit out there during periods of high fire danger. I don't think you guys are going to be able to afford that. But as community members, I certainly encourage kind of a post-storm or lightning storm, kind of do a grid. I know a lot of you have pets and stuff. If the storm occurs at night, go out that next morning and look around. But if it rained at all, your fire might not even kick up until that following afternoon if it's a lightning caused fire. So, if it's this time of year and there's only 3 or 4 people there and there's some type of windstorm or lightning storm that is of concern, then have some people walk around there and maybe get off the trail a little bit. Look and use your senses, smell, listen, and see if you can find any kind of fire.
And I wonder if you could talk some more about your experience with lightning also. It's pretty common to have strong lightning strikes towards the end of the summer, late in the day. And a lot of times it's without rain also. So, I mean, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, that dry lightning is definitely dangerous. And like I said, it's not an instant fire. Sometimes it just ignites a tree enough that it kind of smolders for a couple days, and then the wind picks up the next afternoon, and then it starts going. So don't think that everything's fine immediately after the storm. So do repeated inspections and try to encourage people to go out and check on things. And then you'll be looking at structures too. A structure could do the same thing, but this didn't seem like a lot of thunderstorms in my area this summer. Not as many as in the past. I remember my porch furniture got blown off several times a couple of years ago just from these down microbursts. But I don't know, maybe it was different on Bustins. Did you have any real bad storms this summer?
A couple of pretty good ones.
Yeah.
Roll through. A lot of them go southeast of us and out to sea. Come out a little bit south. Through York County instead of getting into Cumberland and Saginaw. But
Yeah.
they're kind of fun to watch.
Yeah.
When they're coming through.
Yeah. All right, good comments. So just a reminder that NFPA has this Wildfire Community Preparedness Day, and you can get a $500 grant from them to have an event. And I think you guys did this back in 2017 or something. And there's no pressure from us to do this, but it is an option there. And Maine has been pretty successful with some of these grants, and it's not state money, so you can pretty much do whatever you want with it. It comes from State Farm Insurance. Try to wrap things up here. It's getting almost to an hour, but I wanted to share a little experience that I had on this fire mobilization to Colorado. I was a couple hours north of Denver, north of Fort Collins up in the mountains, and I was part of a Type 6 engine, which had 4 firefighters on it. And it's basically a big pickup truck with 300 gallons of water. And we were assigned to do structure protection on the Cameron Peak fire, which was over 100,000 acres when we got there. So it'd been going on for a month or so. People had been evacuated, and these were vacation homes or ranches. This was not the suburbs. This was up in the mountains. But one thing I could not believe there was the amount of wind. We slept in tents, and the second night we were there at 2 o'clock in the morning, the wind nearly blew my tent over. I couldn't sleep. I put it away on the ground underneath the truck. I was worried about trees falling on me. It was quite an event. And then I found out that was kind of a normal thing. Every couple of days they'd have these major windstorms. Well, towards the end, we had been doing our structure protection towards the end of the 2 weeks I was there. We had been doing structure protection over maybe 25, 30 houses within a 3 or 4 months. And they knew this big wind event was coming. They said the wind's going to blow 50 to 60 miles an hour tonight, so we want everything watered down. We had pumps and we watered down the houses. We got as much moisture around them as possible all day. And then when it became dark around 6 or 7 o'clock, we left the area and went to our safety zones. Well, that wind did pick up that night. It was 50 to 60 mile an hour gusts, and it grew. That fire grew that night 20,000 acres, and we could not believe it. So this is a shot from our engine that next morning. It's about 6 o'clock in the morning. It's not quite light yet, and these are areas that we had been working for a week, setting up pumps, and no real fire near there, maybe a mile or so away. And we were told to leave. The wind was still blowing, and we got back there the following day when it was safe to come back in, and we had lost 2 structures. All it was left was a foundation, and it was just devastating. I mean, people had been long evacuated. No one was hurt, but these are their homes, and granted, they might have been second homes, but it was devastating. And we had to. One of our assignments after the fire went through was to take a GPS point of every structure or outbuilding, whether it was burnt or not. And I spent an entire day doing that, and we found more structures that had been burnt. This one log cabin lost their outhouse. All that was left was the metal roof. But the structure survived, and it just kind of made me wonder, like, how come this log cabin survived and the other ones didn't? And I looked around, and they had, instead of having a wooden deck, they extended their foundation with concrete. They had a concrete, unburnable deck. They had mowed the grass near their structures. We watered all these structures, but when you get hurricane-force dry winds, it didn't help much. But I walked away thinking, this defensible space, this clearing of the brush near structures, it really does help. Because I think there would have been a lot more structures gone with those kind of extreme conditions. And I don't want to keep going on about that fire. I felt I learned a lot, and I will try to apply that into my fire prevention efforts here in Maine. But honestly, I couldn't live in a place like this. It's just to have that threat of fire on a daily basis. Every year it gets dry. Every year the wind picks up. It's no way to live. So I really have a lot more appreciation for the state of Maine. Yeah, we have some snowstorms, and we have insects. We have ice storms. We have that kind of stuff. But to live in one of these fire-prone areas is really stressful. I just wouldn't want any part of it. So let's hope this never happens to the state of Maine. It seemed like a 2-week version of the 47 fires to me. But after our crew left, we flew back, and then we had another crew come out and then run the engine for about a week and a half, and they got 14 inches of snow, and then they drove the truck home. So we're all done with our assignment there in Colorado, and everyone made it back safe. So, well, we're getting very close to the hour. I'm going to kind of wrap this up and see if there's any more questions.
Just, I guess, one, all the New England states are going to be, facing budget cuts. Do you see that affecting your program at all?
Good question. I haven't heard anything. I don't think so. I hope not. The money that we use for chipping and for the summer interns is federal money. So that may change with the new administration in a year or two, but I don't know. I think even if we had to go back to using volunteers, you guys would still press on. So let's keep pressing forward, and I don't think we're gonna lose anything. And it's quite obvious, but the brush doesn't stop growing either. So again, my hat's off to you guys for all the effort you made, even during a COVID year, where it was travel restrictions and everything. You guys still have sort of kept up with the onslaught of the brush and kept the program going. So you guys, I hope you continue to do a great job. And I know that place, Bustins Island, is special to you. Some of you are second, third generation owners out there, and I'm proud to be part of the fire prevention program or the efforts out there. So let's hope we can continue.
Thank you, Kent, for all you do too. I mean,